All right, so my clock says 12:04, so start now. This is my name is Rob Barnes. I'm the Executive Director of Ecology Ottawa. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined on this call. It's amazing to have so many of you here. We're now, by the second, you can see the participant list is going up, but we should, there were hundreds of people who are SVP'd, almost 1,000, and so we're hoping that we'll get there in terms of the participant count. We're now closing in on 400, so this is amazing. It is clearly the biggest online rally we've ever held. It's also the only online rally we've ever held, so please bear with us as we proceed over the next hour. And, there might be a few technical issues. Thank you to Paul Johannes from Green Space Alliance for coming in and saving the day with music. I saw there were a lot of comments about music in the chat box, so it's really good that that we were able to accommodate those requests. There was a request for more bass, but unfortunately that was too late.
It played on my phone. I was playing it on my phone. Sorry.
So thank you all to coming. We're here together for an hour today. Thank you for sharing your day with us. We think this is a really important moment. We're as you know, as many of you know, there is a critical vote at committee, at the Planning and Agricultural Affairs Committee at City Council on Monday, May 11th. And they will be deciding on a major component that will shape Ottawa's future for the next 25 years. Full council will then get a vote on May 27th. So this is a kind of an act in two parts. But obviously, this is a major occasion for a big pump up right before the big vote, and we thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank the guests for joining us today. We've got Dr. Diane Sachs, who's the former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, really one of the most knowledgeable expert voices on urban sprawl and climate change and in the provincial context that we have. And we have Councillor Sean Menard, who's joining us. And really has been working on this issue for years and years and years. And he will be accepting on behalf of Ottawa City Council our formal submission of petitions. We're now at almost 4,000 people have signed the petition to hold the line on urban boundary expansion. And so it's really an impressive feat that so many people are coming together. And then we're also going to hear from Paul Johannes from Green Space Alliance, as well as Mo Garahan from Just Food, two member organizations of a larger organization called the People's Official Plan. What we're trying to do, this is a bunch of organizations across the city working to hold the line on urban boundary expansion and guide the new official plan so that it responds to the climate crisis and the climate emergency. And we make it so that this official plan is really Ottawa's climate emergency plan. So thank you very much for coming. In terms of the process today, there are a few pieces, right? There are different speakers who will come in and out at different times. So Dr. Diane Sachs will start it off. Then we've got Mo and Paul will speak to specific issues around food security, agriculture, green space protection. And then Councillor Menard will join us towards the end, where we'll share our screen and submit those petitions. There are also today two occasions. Obviously, this is an online rally. We can't get all of the kind of interactive elements that we'd normally like to have, right, in a real rally. There's not much shouting and chanting, but there is an opportunity for a really cool shot, and actually two. What we want to do is get everyone to grab, if you can, throughout the call today, you've got an hour, if you could find a pen or a marker of some kind, and you can find your rally sign. It just has to be, it could be a piece of paper, it can be a little one. Obviously, we don't need to make big banners because we're all on our phones or computers. But we'd love for you to make a sign, and then there'll be two occasions to hold your sign up to the screen. So hopefully we'll get 900 people across the city holding their signs up saying, hold the line, and we're gonna get that shot, and we're gonna make sure that that we send that to media. Also, I should note that we are recording. We will be recording this for posterity, for shots, for social media sharing. And Joanne Chianella from the CBC has asked if she can have access to the file. We'll send her later, for use in media broadcasts. So I just wanted to let everyone know about that. I think those are all the technical aspects. There will be a big call to action at the end. So please stick around until 1 o'clock. We're going to give you a call to action, how to take action on sprawl in a very meaningful way. In the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to give you a really quick overview as to why we think this matters, right? And you're on this call because you know this matters and you think it matters. So I probably don't need to tell you. And obviously, we've got some great expertise on the line, and they're going to go into depth on this. But from an Ecology Ottawa perspective, our mission and mandate is really oriented around 3 main principles. We want to build a renewable city, which is a city that responds to action on climate change. We want to build an active city, which is a city that prioritizes sustainable transportation. And we want to safeguard and protect our living city, which is our trees, water, and green space. The Hold the Line campaign is really about all 3 of these major initiatives. And this vote at committee and at council is in many ways the most important environmental vote, not only of this council term, but that many of the councillors who we have elected at this city, it's the most important vote they'll make in their entire careers in terms of impact on Ottawa's environment. It'll shape the city for at least the next 25 years and likely many more years to come. So critically important. It touches on all the issue areas. And of course, when I think of Ecology Ottawa's work, it's oriented primarily around responding to climate change. Climate change is embedded into the fabric of all our various campaigns. And on that front, an urban expansion is just in many ways a massive step backwards on climate action. As you might recall, last April, City Council unanimously passed a declaration of climate emergency. This was saying, look, there's an international consensus. Cities around the world need to lead, and Ottawa needs to step up its game. We need to eliminate emissions and become a net zero city by mid-century, by 2050. And so we were aligning our targets with what the scientists have been demanding, what the IPCC have been demanding. So it's a really critically important move that we saw last April, and we think it was a really important one. This urban boundary decision is really the first test as to whether the city will take this declaration of climate emergency seriously, whether it will put its money where its mouth is. And so that's why we think it's absolutely critical that we hold the line on urban expansion, because we know that a more spread out city means longer commutes, means more car-oriented neighborhoods, means more urban sprawl and all the problems that urban sprawl entails that we all know so well. So again, we've got some people who will speak on greater detail on those issues, but obviously the climate lens is at the forefront of our minds when we're thinking about the importance of this vote. Now, I just want to comment briefly before I hand it over to Dr. Diane Sachs. You might have seen many ads from developers. They're blanketing social media, they're blanketing Facebook and Twitter and ad space with a really expensive campaign. They're pushing hard to expand the urban boundary as far as they can take it. They're not even happy with the current quote unquote balanced scenario that City Hall are presenting, that city staff have presented to City Hall. And obviously that's a major problem, but I think it's telling, right? It shows where their interests lie, and their interest lies in more sprawl, more far-flung communities, because there's a profit motive associated with it. It's a profitable enterprise to continue business as usual, to continue sprawl. And we, on the other hand, collectively, we have the people power, right? 4,000 of us have signed petitions. There are communities in every corner of the city who are asking the mayor and council to hold the line. And so today's rally is so important for that reason too, that we're stepping up to the plate as a collective and saying enough is enough. We've got to hold the line. We've got to intensify in a smart way moving forward. So thank you again. And without further ado, I'll now hand it over to Dr. Diane Sachs, the former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario and a wonderful speaker. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Sachs. Over to you.
My pleasure. Hopefully we're getting this together. Okay, can you see my slides? Yes, okay, great. So I'm going to try to run through these really quickly. Canada, as I hope you all know, is a really big climate polluter. We are a small population, but of the nearly 200 countries in the world, we're in the top 10 climate polluters. Both now and cumulatively. And if you look across Canada, most of those emissions are from Alberta and Ontario. In Alberta, the big driver is the oil sands. It's the main driver of their emissions. It's a key economic sector. It's got very large political power. It's traditionally had very large donors, there for the ear of the political class. At the same time, an enormous environmental cost, much of which they dump on the public. If you're interested in more about that, I did an op-ed last week in the National Observer. But they make a lot of profits from continuing to operate business as usual, the old paradigm. In Ontario, we have exactly the same thing when it comes to sprawl. Urban sprawl is the main driver of our emissions. The developers have enormous economic power. They're big donors to political parties. They create enormous environmental costs, which are borne by all the rest of us, and they profit from continuing business as usual, which, as you all know, will give us no future. So let's see if I can. Hang on a second. I don't know, hopefully that gives you a better screen. In Ontario, most of the emissions are from individuals, not from industry. Certain governments like to blame heavy industry, but in fact, only about a third of the emissions in Ontario are from heavy industry. Most of them are from you and I, and most of that is from people driving around. As you can see, transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in Ontario. And it's because Ontarians drive more than ever before. I mean, you can see how much we drove 30 years ago, and we still had quite a civilized place to live 30 years ago. Why do we drive so much? Well, mostly because of where we live. 3 out of 4 Ontarians live in car-dependent suburbs. It's often the only option that they have, and that's not an accident. Ontario has been deliberately designed this way, as if we were never going to run out of land, as if there were no consequences to turning woodlands, wetlands, and farmland into asphalt and suburbs. And as you can see, we've known the basic facts, but car-dependent suburbs have grown 5 times faster than walkable and transit-friendly areas. And we drive those distances in, you'll be glad to know, it's always good to be #1, and we in Canada are #1. We drive the most climate polluting vehicles in the entire world. We have beaten out the United States, which is really hard to do when it comes to climate pollution. It makes the air dirty from tailpipe emissions. We've hopefully all right now have a real appreciation for our lungs. And we know that the more air pollution people are exposed to, the more susceptible they are to getting COVID and to suffering more from it. Well, the largest source, for most people in Ontario, the largest source of air pollution that damages lungs is tailpipe emissions from fossil fueled vehicles. And if you think about it, that's particularly a problem for the young and for anyone else who's vulnerable. So if you think about a father pushing a stroller along a busy street, he's breathing fine particles that are going to his lungs and do long-term damage. But the baby is breathing in 60% more than he is because her nose is closer to the tailpipes, and she has immature lungs, and if she gets cancer-causing particles, they've got a whole lifetime to damage her. So who breathes near busy roads? Well, those are the people who are the most adversely affected. We've also, because of our relentless creation of sprawl, we've created the worst congestion. We have, you'd be glad to know, GTA residents, the longest, worst commutes in North America, worse than New York City, worse than Los Angeles, and it's deliberately because of the creation of sprawl. No one can build highways enough to solve congestion once you build low-density subdivisions. Urban sprawl has all kinds of high costs. This is from the Smart Prosperity Institute. Taxes must be much higher in suburban areas because it just costs so much more to provide services over all those areas. And none of this counts the impact, the greater flood risk, the greater environmental damage that's caused by suburbs. And we know that woodlands and wetlands are critical for providing some place for water to go. And we know that the climate crisis is going to continue to increase the intensity of rainfall when it comes. It has a huge and long-lasting carbon footprint, low-density areas. People who live in low-density areas, just from their transport and their housing, have huge carbon footprints compared to people who can walk to the store and to the school and to the library and where other places they need to go or cycle. And you create an urban form like that, it's almost permanent, lasts for a really long period of time. Woodlands, wetlands, and farmland, these are irreplaceable gifts. We know from the research of the last couple of years how heavily the climate crisis is going to affect food supply, food security, food quality. We're already starting to see diseases spreading around the world affecting food supplies, which never did before. The wetlands, we know we need them for adapting to climate change. We know that every time we lose a wetland, we are going to have worse flooding, more damage, down gradient. So we're just knifing our own selves in the belly by paving these areas. So every planning decision matters. You know, the old joke is if you're in a deep hole and you need to get out, the first thing you have to do is to stop digging. Well, we're in a really deep hole. And the first thing we have to do is to stop making them worse. And expanding the urban boundary will make things worse. It'll make a small number of people a lot of money, but for all the rest of us and for our community as a whole, it's making things very much worse. We do know what to do. We know we need to grow in and not out. That doesn't mean putting everybody in a high-rise condo. It means townhouses or stacked townhouses. We know that this provides a lower overall cost of living. Developers claim that you need to keep paving everything around cities in order to keep housing costs down. Well, A, that's only partly true, but B, housing costs are not the only costs. There's transportation costs, there's the cost of family of having the adults spend an hour or two a day commuting, there's the cost of losing our protection against floods. So we do know that in most urban areas in Ontario, there is lots of room to put the additional housing that we need. We don't need to expand urban boundaries anymore. We should not be expanding urban boundaries anymore. There is lots of room for people to live where there are already urban services, in many cases where there are already jobs, and where there are other people nearby, where people can have a better quality of life. So clean, connected, compact communities, that it's not a secret. It's been well known by planners for many years. This is the future we need. It's the future we destroy by continuing to allow urban boundary expansion. So what can we do? Everyone at every level, individuals, families, communities, organizations, we have to reduce our carbon footprint. And if we want a stable climate, we have to reduce our carbon footprint by half this decade. That means cutting it about 7.5% a year, which is a lot. But since we're some of the most wasteful people in the world, we've got lots of room to cut and still have really good lives. We need to get ready to adapt to the crazy weather that's coming. And we have to do this most un-Canadian thing and speak up for collective action. Climate crisis cannot be solved by individual action. It requires collective action. So how do we speak up? Speaking up feels really scary to a lot of people. So I'd like you to memorize these 11 words. In fact, I'd like you to say them back to me, even though I can't hear you. Simple, clear messages, repeated often by a variety of trusted voices. Say it with me again. Simple, clear messages, repeated often by a variety of trusted voices. And each of you is a trusted voice for some people. And you know people who are trusted voices for other people. And the three most important things to speak up on is to price climate pollution, to stop sprawl, and to protect nature. So that's what we all need to do. That's what you guys can do. Who would like to have some hope in the face of the climate crisis? Well, I would. This is the only formula I know. We have to start with looking at the facts. And for those of you interested, there's a lot of information on my website, sacsfacts.com, if you'd like a lot more detail about climate. And if you'd like the link with sprawl, the 4th chapter of my last report to the legislature goes on with that. You're welcome to go read it. But we have to start with knowledge, but we can't stop there, because if we stop with knowledge, then it's just a recipe for despair. The way to find hope is to take action together with other people on concrete things that matter, and urban sprawl, urban boundary is absolutely one of those. So thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody else. No one can do everything. Everyone can do something. There are windows in the political landscape when action really matters. And in Ottawa today, you're at one of them. So thank you, Rob. Enjoy the rest of the rally.
Thank you very much to Dr. Sachs. Thank you for joining us, Diane.
My pleasure.
Normally, this is where we'd give you a big round of applause, but unfortunately, we're not able to do that. So thank you. That's amazing, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us in this really important fight. Okay, up next, we've got two amazing guests who've been working really hard on this issue alongside Ecology Ottawa and a bunch of other fantastic organizations for almost a year now. We have Paul Johannes, who's with the Green Space Alliance of Canada's capital, a tremendously important organization that is really strong on the policy side and really understands the implications and issues associated with urban sprawl at depth. And Paul has in many ways been our guide over the last year in terms of leading us through the methodological assumptions, the numbers, and all of the various technical aspects that have led to this point where the city is now faced with this decision on urban expansion. So Paul will be the first half of this presentation. The second half will be Mo Garahan, the Executive Director of Just Food, another incredible organization that works on food security and agricultural issues in Canada, or in Ottawa, sorry. Sorry, Mo, I didn't mean our country to your plate in terms of work, but another important perspective on food security, especially we've seen at a time of COVID-19 that food security is more important than ever. So I'll just hand it over to Paul and Mo to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to be appointed a Sherpa to this group. That's great. I love that role. So after Dr. Sachs's presentation, I don't really need to lay out what the stakes are. We've heard all of the facts and reason behind why this is so important. You know, the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is growing exponentially. That's kind of the other curve we have to flatten. Now, it's a slow-moving crisis. We know that. It plays itself out over decades. But in this time scale, we're now where we were, say, with COVID in early March. You know, we're just coming out of the dismiss, deny, delay stage. And we know what the cost of delay is now. We understand what the cost is of delay in this circumstance. So the time to act is now. Now, what we have in front of us is a staff report that was written for the joint meeting of Planning and Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee. And in this report, there's a recommended expansion of the urban boundary. And we've heard other analysis from the city that the recommended expansion would have a marginal impact on carbon dioxide emissions. They come out, you know, like with a 1.2% estimate or something like that. But in a way, that's to be expected. So even though this is a very large expansion, 1,650 hectares maybe. If you think of that, that's as large as, if we know the Ottawa geography, that's as large as Sandy Hill, Lower Town, Downtown, Centertown, the Glebe, Little Italy, and Hittenburg combined. That's how large that is. But even though that's very large, compared to the total urban area of Ottawa, it's a fraction. And so the impact of that one increase is a fraction. But as we heard from Dr. Sachs, it's not the one increase. What we're living is, this is just a continuation of business as usual. Over the last 30 years, we've added over 4,500 hectares to the urban area of Ottawa. Every couple of years, there's a few added. Every 5 years, there's a big chunk added. And that's really been a big part of our collective contribution to the climate crisis that we're facing now. And it's likely to continue in the future unless we act now. So we need to stop this pattern now. This is our time to do that. Now, there's an option on the table which would achieve this, and that's the no expansion option. Staff wrote it up. It's in the report. It supplies the same number and types of dwellings as the other options. It's also compliant with the provincial policy statement, like the other options. And it wasn't recommended by staff because it was considered too ambitious. Now, it's kind of surprising that staff is the one that's deciding what's too ambitious and what's not. It seems to me that's a role of the elected officials to do. But anyways, that's what staff has recommended. And as a result of that, have gone instead with the recommended option of 1,600 to be added. Now, the main difference between the two options is the amount of the number of the units that would be provided through construction in the existing built-up area of the city. In the staff report, it's 92,000 units. What we would need to avoid urban expansion is 115,000 units. So if we look more closely, you know, they say it's too ambitious, but if we look closely at the number of units by type of units, we see that in fact it's not a large difference. It's really kind of an incremental difference. If we look at apartments, for example, the report calls for 42,700 units of apartments to be built through intensification. To get to zero expansion, you just have to boost that by 2,500 to about 45,000. If that's looked at over a period of 25 years across all 19 urban wards, it basically comes out to like 1 3-story, 6-unit building per ward per year. So the scare stories that we're hearing, oh my God, if we go with no expansion, there's going to be towers in every neighborhood, is just not true. The numbers of dwellings at our apartments are almost exactly the same. In terms of the number of semi-detached, almost exactly the same. In terms of rows and townhouses, there's a difference. The staff recommendation is to go with 28,500. To get to no expansion, we'd have to get to 38,500. But again, if you break that down by ward, by year, you're looking at like 6 or 7 3-unit townhouses per ward per year. A ward is a very large area. If you have 5 or 6 neighborhoods in that ward, that's like 1 every 5 or 6 years, 3-row block of townhouses. So the point being is that the differences between these scenarios, the no expansion scenario and the recommended scenario, is actually manageable. It's small. This is a viable path. It's been made to sound a lot worse than it is. We've also heard that we need to add urban expansion. We need to add land to the urban area for affordability reasons, because somehow that's the equation that works. But right in the staff report, right in the city staff report, there's a statement that says, research, plenty of research has shown that adding to land supply does not affect price. So, I mean, that's right in the staff report. So this is a big argument on the developer side, on GOBA side. They're advertising that right now. They ran a big survey with the results coming out last night where affordability was #1, which I think we can all agree affordability is terrible, but you're not going to solve it by adding land to the urban boundary. That's not the solution to that particular problem. And well, too ambitious, again, who's to judge? We think that's the political leader's job to judge that. We were looking at some other cities that are in Ontario that have official plans and that have constrained borders. I'm looking at St. Catharines, for example, where it's a city that is 70% urban, 30% agricultural, and they've decided in their official plan they're not going to expand the urban boundary. It's just out of the question. Their intensification target is 95%, and they've had that since 2012. So that sounds ambitious. The city said in its big moves, it had 5 big moves, right? And one of the big moves was from now on, the majority of new growth will be done through intensification. Well, they delivered on that by promising to go to 51% of new growth. Well, that's the majority, I guess, by 1%. But it doesn't sound like a big move to me. I think we probably have lots of room for more ambition in achieving this. Anyways, so the staff report itself, again, all of these numbers, by the way, these are not numbers we made up. These are the city's numbers. I mean, this is a valid option that's in the report with the city's own numbers. So the staff report concludes that the no expansion option represents the greatest extent, and this is a quote, the greatest extent to which growth management can contribute to achieving policy directions where most growth occurs through intensification, 1, growth uses existing infrastructure most efficiently, 2, and greenhouse gas emission reductions are maximized. So then you would say, well, why don't you choose that option? Well, as I said, they just think it's too ambitious. I think we've demonstrated that the difference between the two options, the recommended option and the no expansion option in terms of numbers of units of the different types is small and manageable. And it's certainly worth the trade-off if it saves 1,650 hectares of rural green space now and arrests the pattern of constant urban expansion in response to the climate crisis. Maintaining a compact form buys us some time. It helps us to flatten the curve until we actually get to a point where there are large reductions in emissions from decarbonization. But we're not there yet. So we need to take steps to flatten that curve until we can bring down the emissions. So on climate, we have to take a long-term perspective. It's going to play itself out over decades. And it can only be fixed slowly as well. But every little bit counts. So even though this is just one bit, it's a collective action problem. The actions of one municipality just this one time may not have a large impact, may not seem to have a large impact, but that is not a reason not to act. Every action matters, and every one of them adds its weight to the collective response that we have to bring to this. So in the end, this is a political issue. It's in the hands of our elected representatives at City Hall. Now, the no expansion option is a viable path. Our elected representatives can't hide behind the numbers. They can't say, oh, the numbers made us do it. We've seen that the numbers work. They can't hide behind the policy saying, oh, the provincial policy statement is making us do it. No, it's PPS compliant not to expand. So it's really up to them. There's a viable path to the climate responsible solution. And it's up to all of us to press them to take that path. And so we're asking people to send this message saying, we oppose the urban expansion. We understand that it can increase density in my neighborhood. We understand that. But we think that's a trade-off that is worth taking and that we're willing to accept at this time where we need to respond to the climate emergency. So thank you very much for having me today, Rob, and all of you for being with us.
Thanks very much, Paul. And over to you now, Mo. And just a quick public service announcement. I hope people are working on their amazing rally materials, and we're going to do a group shot right after Mo finishes her presentation. So you don't need much. You know, some markers, color is even better. I see some very talented artists out there. I'm working with just a marker, but you know, tweet it on social media, and hopefully we're going to get a really good screenshot of 525 people with these signs. So thank you. We'll touch base on that right after Mo's piece. Mo, over to you.
Mo, can I take just a sec? Avant, je voulais dire, souhaiter la bienvenue à tous nos amis francophones qui se joignent à nous actuellement. Parce qu'on l'a oublié de le faire au début de ce rallye. Donc, merci d'être avec nous. Et puis, maintenant, je vais demander à Maud de continuer.
see. Hi everyone, and Rob, you were not mistaken. I am also the project director for a Canadian-wide organization called Food Communities Network. So I have the privilege of sitting in the position of seeing how municipalities and communities across Canada are dealing around food and farming issues in response to COVID. So I come to you with that hat on, as well as my executive director hat on of Just Food here in Ottawa. Thank you everyone for coming today. So I am here to say that food is equally central to our urban, suburban, and rural communities in Ottawa. No matter what your issue is that you are coming of primary concern today, it is connected to the decisions we make about the food system. Climate is affected. Affordable and accessible housing and transportation affects people's food security. Justice for Indigenous and racialized community members is connected to access to culturally relevant, accessible, affordable foods, as well as good working conditions in our food, farming, and tourism sectors for all workers in our communities. And this is a huge economic sector in Ottawa. Having livable, just communities for all of us with community and green space integrated and a tree canopy is something that every one of us is interested in wherever we live across the urban, rural, and suburban areas. And a focus on food for all, which has climbed in importance during these COVID-19 times. It's really on the minds of everyone in a way that hasn't been this way for decades, and is sharpening our understanding of the critical importance of a local food system to deal with food disruptions at a global level. We can't always rely on the 24/7 global food system that we have in the past for those that have been able to afford food within that system. We are going to be facing increased global food disruptions that are already here before COVID, strengthened and pronounced during this time, which is a long period of time, and we're going to have a long period of economic recovery. So all of this is sharpening our understanding about the critical importance of all of these issues for generations to come with this decision that our council is making today, this month. So we all need to commit to understanding and speaking to these integrated issues and ensure that each councillor hears it. This is not just a disparate picture. These are all coming together. So within that, a food lens for the official plan is required to both hold the lines, not just singular, but the lines on urban and rural village expansion, and commit to complete 15-minute communities within these boundaries to keep economic, environmental, and health benefits for all of us who live here in this city. So I want to be clear, Just Food has done an analysis of the staff report, and we will be releasing that, but I want to give you a few highlights specific to farmland. Saying yes to what staff has misnamed as a balanced scenario means that councillors will be forced to sacrifice prime agricultural land that is today actively farmed. So there is an identification of general rural land, which will be looked at in terms of urban expansion. And this is full of Class 2 and Class 3 farmland, productive prime agricultural land that is actively farmed right now. And it is this land that is most likely to be selected for the urban expansion area. Council is being asked to vote on a concept of urban expansion without a list of what urban expansion lands this is referring to. And as such, they cannot guarantee that this will not include prime agriculture, which affects the food security for generations to come. So how can councillors possibly make a planning decision in the absence of information about the lands that will be impacted by the decision they are making? This is the question that has to be before them. So we're at a position where we need City Council to ask staff to come back with a more complete picture with the values that we're talking about online today. The values of farmland preservation, the values of good food for all, the value of affordable housing and transportation that we can build within an environmentally beautiful city, these are the decisions that we need unambiguous facts about, not a broad concept that then will roll out the details that at the end we find out are not meeting these values. We need clear information about if they're proposing urban expansion, what exact lands is this on? How will this meet the other targets that are being set for values like climate emergency, housing emergency, food security for all? It is critical for all of us to ensure that this information is clear. We can't, no other time are we asked to make a conceptual decision without the facts in front of us. So COVID-19 presented one shock to our system. It's not the last shock. We are going to experience other shocks, both economically and environmentally. These shocks are a chance for us to adapt and to prepare. If we don't use this opportunity to, in what we're bringing forward, to protect our farmland and our food system, along with the other issues you've heard today, we are definitively setting ourselves up for failure. So staff feel that the rate of change is too high for the industry to adapt to, the development industry. Quotes from that's within the report itself. Staff feel that the rate of change with no urban expansion is too high for the industry to adapt to. We believe that this low opinion of Ottawa's development community reflected in this report does them a disservice. We do have innovative developers that are interested in working on interesting models of housing, including tiny house opportunities as an affordable house option, which is also of interest to many farmers who want to be near land. And this is on new farmers that want small holdings. We have developers that are interested in making sure there's good housing for young people and seniors who want to remain in rural villages where they grew up and where there's no affordable housing. There are developers who want to look at more row housing and cooperative housing models and many different interesting things that can be disproportionately higher in our future housing to single homes. We can still have single dwellings, but they are disproportionately represented in the staff report. We have developers who want to work in this way. It is possible to preserve farmland. It's now more important than ever. We need to allow council to know that all of us here on this call believe that it is possible and we know that they can do it. So please join us in asking council to not make this decision now, to get better information to make this decision. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Mo. Et je voudrais dire quelques mots en français aussi. Merci à Paul pour ces bons mots en français pour l'introduction. Je regrette le fait que j'ai oublié au commencement. Alors, désolé pour nos amis francophones. On espère toujours d'améliorer nos travail. Alors, je vais faire des introductions dans le futur en français. Now, I wanted to thank Paul and Mo and give a shout out to them. And right before introducing Councillor Menard, there's just two pieces of housekeeping that I'd like to take care of. And they're very important and fun housekeeping. So one is, I'd like to know if everyone can put up your signs now so we can get a big shot here. We are recording this, so we're going to get the best, most magical screenshot we can possibly get and send it in to the mayor. We're going to send it in to council. We're going to send it to the media. So if everyone can just hold up their signs, I'll give you 5 seconds to get things in line. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go. How's that? Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Fantastic. Thanks for those, and we'll have another opportunity at the end. Now, the other piece of housekeeping is, as I said, fun. I promised a fun piece of housekeeping. Some of you know the name Jeanette Sadik-Khan. She is a former New York transportation planner. She's a wonderful thinker on urban issues, on equity, on a bunch of the issues that are really at play here when we're thinking about holding the line. And we reached out to Jeanette to get a quote from her, and she actually provided us a quote. Isaac is sharing it now. So we just wanted to thank Jeanette Sadek-Khan. She's the author of a book called Street Fight, which, if you haven't read it, is just a wonderful account of how the struggle in New York City over making the city more walkable and more bike friendly. And this is really what we're doing in Ottawa too. Hold the Line is also about active transportation. It's also about viable transit, and it's fundamentally about how we get around the city in many ways. So I just wanted to take a minute to take in that quote. I'm not going to read it for you, but we'll send this out after the call too. And so just a big shout out to Jeanette Sadek-Khan for the support, for supporting Ottawa. Just like all cities around the world, we're wrestling with the problem of urban sprawl and urban mobility. So thank you, Jeanette. Now, I'd love to introduce Councillor Sean Menard, who, if I'm not mistaken, was at the original Hold the Line rally about 10 years ago. And so, Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong there. But I'd love to hand it over to you. And then towards the end of your piece, Sean, because you're the representative of Ottawa City Council who's on the call with us, we'll do a screen share, and then we're going to formally submit the petition signatures to city staff in the run-up to the Planning and Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee meeting on Monday, May 11th. So we'll do that screen share. Isaac's going to send that email after your piece, Sean.
Great, thank you so much, Rob, and thanks for allowing me to say a few words today. Yeah, I do remember being at that rally 10 years ago outside of council chambers on the same topic. I think we had less people out there at that time, but it was nonetheless, exhilarating. That vote was 12-11 to limit expansion during that time, and that was when Larry O'Brien was mayor. Hard to believe where we are today with councils potentially set to expand under this scenario. So I guess the issue we're discussing is really emblematic of a city that is going through a reevaluation of its priorities. The reason the issue is so rare is that it brings together things like affordable housing, spending and tax efficiency, climate and sustainability implications, transit use, congestion, equity, core infrastructure, and developer influence to the table. And it is it's as much a values-based discussion as it is a hard numbers discussion, despite those who would tell you differently. And in Ottawa, there really is a shift happening, and it's manifesting itself in demands for action on climate. We're seeing a move towards new urbanism. There's a growing millennial population and influence and activism, a real distaste for developer money in election campaigns, and a desire to rein in that influence so that people have more influence. Despite this, we are stuck with the same sort of old power structure that I believe is out of step with the broader population. And so this has really resulted in the fiasco that has occurred with the privatization of our LRT line and massive transfer of public wealth to inadequate companies. The democratic deficit is witnessed in attempts to silence transit commissioners or in the way our committees are appointed, placing those who have benefited from developer connections and donations into positions of power. And so the issue in front of us is no different. It is set up to achieve an outcome that uses the word balance, but really transfers public wealth for private developer gain. On the specifics of the report, it is concerning in several ways. The financial analysis does not exist on a number of fronts. The cost differential for our climate goals, if expansion is allowed versus not, the costs on transit extension, especially to those leapfrog potential parcels of land, infrastructure services and ongoing maintenance costs are not there, and it merely confirms the most efficient option is the no growth scenario, but doesn't go into specifics. So, there is weak analysis on some of our aging population and their downsizing trends. There's not enough discussion on what it would mean to build fewer single-family homes and how we could achieve no boundary expansion that way. And there are various loopholes built in that you can see from previous developer appeals, but certainly around transit expansion, agricultural lands, and assumptions being made about whether Ottawa is prepared to accept curbing sprawl or not. Some of these loopholes are going to play out if this thing passes in the future. And so there are a few things on strategy I would mention. You should be calling and emailing your friends in different wards on this. Send it to 5 friends or neighbors and tell them to email their councillor. This vote really shouldn't be happening at this moment. There's too much information missing. We need to speak to that. There are criteria that can be set up to limit sprawl based on strict criteria such as affordable housing, transit, agricultural concerns, and climate goals. And there, the fourth piece on strategy is that there's an option on timing triggers. So if expansion is intended, when does that begin? We have more than enough capacity, even within low intensification percentages, to build within the provincial policy statement to 2036. So that's a key consideration as well. I don't know which way this is going to go on May 11th and May 27th. So May 11th is the committee meeting on Monday. May 27th is the council meeting. But I can tell you that the winds of change are blowing in Ottawa. I would encourage all of you to get involved, not just in this term of council, but start working towards the next election. We're going to see a new council and a new mayor. But watch these votes carefully and hold people accountable. Thanks for that, Rob, and the time today, and I'm happy to take the petition with you.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Now over to you, Isaac. All right, so we're doing a screen share here. This is very advanced technology. We are now going to submit the list of email signatures to the city. So thank you to everyone who signed the petition. There's still more time to sign after today. We're going to do a second round of submissions. I think, Isaac, you hit the big red button, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Message sent. Awesome. So thank you very much, Isaac, for that. And thank you to everyone for signing. As I said, there's still time to add your names. The May 11th vote is really important, but then May 27th, there's a full vote at council, which is also critically important. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for so long on the call. For being here. I know it's not the most normal rally we've ever had. It's online, and but over 500 of you stuck it out with us and engaged with us on a variety of different media. So thank you very much. Now I just want to give one big call to action here, right? In the minutes that remain. Fundamentally, votes like this, we know from experience, they really hinge on the leadership of the mayor. Now, Jim Watson has made some comments about supporting the balanced scenario. We think that's where he's leaning, but there's still time to change his mind. And the way we change any politician's mind who is disinclined to lead is to show them that there's massive people support behind an initiative. So today, I'd like to urge you all, right after this call, to phone Jim Watson's office. I'd love to have his office flooded with 500 messages, 500 phone calls. And so Isaac, I don't know if you have his number and email address on a slide that you can share with us. Here we go. So there's his number, 613. It's not his home number. We don't want to do that, but it's his office number, 613-580-2496. I urge everyone to call this number and leave a message. Tell the mayor that this is a really critically important vote on May 27th. This is the one at full council, and that we really need him to get on the right side of history here. And then also his email address, jim.watson@ottawa.ca. You can send him an email as well. Do both. Tell your friends. Get the word out. There's still time to win this. I'd like to thank all of the guests today for joining us. I'd like to thank Isaac and Emily and the many volunteers who are calling folks every night and just trying to keep this campaign going. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of you for joining us on this important call. It really makes a world of difference. Now let's do one more shout out while we have time with our rally signs. We're going to get one more group photo if we can before we press the big exit button. So I'll give you 5 seconds to get your sign. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Please be sure to tweet this, to Facebook it, and get the word out. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to end the call now. Have a good one.